Okay, so we shall proceed to the next presentation while people wrap up their pizza. So our next presenter is Donatien Adu. He's a third-year PhD student at the University of Missouri, Columbia, in the Political Science Department, with research interest in comparative political economy and public policy. His main research focuses on the determinants of corruption in Africa. He also has an interest in field research methods, especially conjoint analysis that he uses in various academic projects. Donatien's work on public policy inquires into public attitudes toward poverty in Africa. He's from the Ivory Coast, where he works as a scientific committee member of the think tank Audace Institute Afrique, working on rural land rights. The title of his presentation this afternoon is When Life in Community Matters, Urbanization and Corruption in Africa. Let's put our hands together as we welcome Ajay.
Thank you all for being here today. I know it's a busy time of the semester, and my research doesn't touch on life immediately as together because I will say more related at some point, but it's very important as well. And let's get started. So, in general, in Africa, we have noticed that urbanization is really growing very fast. So, in 1960, we have about 50% of the population that live in urban areas. And by 2018, we are about 45%. So, which is pretty fast. But to put that in perspective, let's look at the world trend. So you can see that at the same period, 1960, the difference was about 20%, and now is more about 10 to 15%. So it means Africa grows much faster in urban population than the actual world population. Of course, it has consequences, and what those consequences are. Firstly, we know that this really is good for development. Having people living in villages coming to town and helping work in industries like kind of fuel development, and we need that for an economy to grow. And there is a vast literature on that. However, the consequences are not only positive, they are also negative. And we see a lot of work as well talking about that. Specifically talking about crisis in infrastructures, health issues, and crime and all that. So basically, here we have kind of mixed effects of urbanization. However, very few studies really talk about the political processes and basically how this affects the quality of governance, because there is a considerable switch from a specific way of governing to another way of governing. So there is really something going on here. So I want to understand how does urbanization really affect the quality of governance, and looking specifically at corruption. And well, why should we even care about knowing that? There are several reasons, but few of them are like African countries have high level of corruption, and anything that can really help us know what causes that is useful, because corruption is bad for growth, and of course then for development. And also at the same time, we want to inform policymakers whenever they're taking decisions on urbanization policies and planning, what to consider and what really to look out for. What do we know? Well, existing studies can be classified in two categories. The first category that we call country-specific studies. They kind of look at specific countries, and mainly this in the US. One study is conducted in Spain, but most of the studies are done in the US. And the results are kind of mixed. On the one hand, people find that, oh, the more urban you get, the more corruption you will get. And then others say, well, there is no real effect. So this is kind of mixed. But there is a big problem with those studies. They cannot be generalized to other contexts. So the external validity is very low. It is only one country and it's very specific data that it uses. So it does not really help us understand the rest of the world. So I turn more to cross-country studies, those studies that take into account several countries and help us understand this in the most systematic way. And what I find is that those studies have a kind of common understanding that urbanization lowers corruption. So this is really, I would say, the common wisdom in this literature. And they really talk about two mechanisms that enforce corruption, or that really reduce corruption in urban areas. And those studies, of course, are conducted mainly in developed countries. So they say that corruption is easier to detect in cities because government has an oversight of the people, and which makes them less likely to do so. And also, corruption is easier to stigmatize in cities, which really I don't believe, and since they don't really theorize about it, I cannot criticize that extensively. So basically those realities would be like kind of deterrents and help push people not to commit corrupt deeds. But I really think that, yeah, of course, those mechanisms are untrue in African context, and for several reasons that I will explain shortly. And like I was saying before, there is very little theorization in general. So you say something's happened, but you don't really tell how it happened, why it happens. They kind of run a bunch of analysis and say, oh, we find that and what it is, which is not really scientifically satisfying. So looking at the realities, I argue that urbanization will lead to more corruption and kind of go against the conventional wisdom in those studies. So my two mechanisms is that corruption becomes less costly in an urban setting, especially in Africa. And also, new city dwellers become more vulnerable, or are more vulnerable to bureaucrats. And I will explain those now in detail. So, if today you live here without having anything, without remembering anything, just remember that corruption or urbanization leads to corruption in Africa. And here are the two reasons. Of course, there can be other explanations, but those are what I find much credible. To understand that, I think to theorize that appropriately, we need to understand the transition most African countries are going through. So there is no really agreement of how to divide the African state in terms of like governance. But one unifying or one that really kind of most scholars agree on is that African state can be characterized traditional before colonization and before independence, and then more modern state after independence years. So the African traditional state really can be characterized of heteronomy, to borrow a term from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. So in this life, which is basically traditional in villages, the group is more important than the individual. So your life basically is in a group, in a community. And this citation really, or this quote, kind of give us a good idea of what life really is. I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. So everything is about like life in community, right? And there is this ubiquitous belief in the gods that really hold people back in many ways. And the African state has kind of strong, the traditional state has this strong morality attached to acts. And this is documented by a very famous Nigerian scholar, Peter Ike, who really have a seminal work on that. And then we know that in this context as well, misdeed can have heavy consequences. If, for instance, you are perceived to be a troublemaker in the group, you can be excluded, which is really costly for you and also for your kid and family in general. So this is really kind of constrain misdeed and constrain corruption. Now, when you go in the modern state, it is more characterized by autonomy. So in the modern state, the individual becomes more important than the group. Everyone is looking out for himself. And the peer pressure that we had in the autonomy system is not present, or at least is less prevalent in the modern state. And there is basically a lower risk of misbehaving, especially that African states are not that strong. We know most of states are fragile, some are even failed states. So in general, corruption will be less costly in cities, in general. So basically, we go from this place where people live in group, and then to cities where we find everyone working and thinking about how to survive. Then, second, when people firstly move to cities, they tend to use more government resources. And as such, they will be more likely to initiate bribes or even to be asked bribes. And usually they are less likely to be educated and mostly poor that come for better opportunities. So they become easy targets for strict level bureaucrats. And this fact is kind of backed up by a study done in Peru and shows that specifically people who are in vulnerable situations are more likely to be victims of bribes and corruption in general. So to test this argument, to see really how this happened, if my intuition is right, I'm using a panel study of 53 countries, and Sudan is excluded, South Sudan now, because basically they have about 5 or 6 years of data available, so which basically is not going to be allowed for me to analyze. And I'm using a fixed effect model because we expect that there are some differences across different states. We have different levels of urbanization, also of corruption. So we want to keep this effect fixed so that we know exactly if there is an effect enough to account for all this heterogeneity in those countries. This is a technical, I'm trying to keep it much simple when it comes to the method because I know it's a general audience. Then, so my dependent variable is a corruption index conducted by, put together by the Virtue of Democracy, and is done by academics, which make it more viable for my project. And I measure urbanization by the percentage of people living in urban areas. And this index is provided by the World Bank. Then I control for other factors like democracy, because we know that if you country democratic, then government has more ability to control the administration and to kind of fight corruption and all that. Also talk about ethnic fractionalization. There is an extensive literature on that saying that when a country is ethnically diverse, there is more opportunities to bribe and to conduct corrupt contracts. Development matters as well, and aid, which the effect is not really fixed. We have trade, and also we think that the colonizer matters, and specifically Britain, British colonies are thought to be less corrupt in general, which over time kind of disappeared. The effect is now very weak and almost non-existent, but it is necessary to control for it in case it intervenes in my result. And then you have, of course, natural resources that really make most African states less dependent on the taxpayer money to do business, So basically, they are not accountable to the people. So we expect that all those factors may in some way impact the level of corruption. So we consult for them to make sure our results we're getting are really coming from the effect of urbanization. And like I was saying, this is technical, but we see basically that very significant effect in across several models to make sure I'm catching on whether there is a bias somewhere I can correct for. I know this looks Chinese to some people, but in the simpler language, in the plain language, it means that when we have 1% increase in urbanizations, then we'll get about 0.5% increase in corruption, which is pretty substantial and can really have an effect on how better governance will be in Africa in general. So, what do we retain from these studies? So, firstly, we need to know that my study contradicts what the conventional wisdom is, and I really show that urbanization kind of negatively impacts the quality of governance, impacts corruption. And for a few recommendations, government services should be more decentralized. Because people are not used to government services when they come to service, it becomes much easier for them to fall into traps of bureaucrats. If you don't know the price of, for instance, a document, you can easily get done by someone telling you, oh, it is maybe $1 more than it is in reality. And also, most importantly, we think that government should include traditional way of governing into the modern state. We should not just follow what we see somewhere, but also try to adapt what we have to our local realities to make it more viable to the people. Because if I don't trust you, if I feel like the new government is far from my realities, I'm more likely to distrust this government. So, in general, this is what I have for you today, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Adu. So now we'll open up for a couple of delegates.
Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions which are sort of linked. First of all, is there a definition for the corruption you are talking about?
All right.
Is it static? Is it the same in one area and the other areas, or is specific to a certain region? I'll give the example. Way back, when I heard of corruption, the thing to come into my mind, and maybe that was what was belabored in our country, was the question of nepotism.
Okay.
I come now to America. I find nepotism being practiced, especially in politics, because that's what we're exposed to in our everyday life, what we see on TV. But I don't hear of it being mentioned as nepotism. But when it happens in Africa, it's labeled as nepotism. Okay. Then my second question, when you are talking about urbanization, are you also considering globalization in that definition? You know why? Because you are talking about urbanization where people are moving from the rural areas into the urban area, but internet is moving into all areas, including rural. So within that urbanization, if part of it is coming because of globalization, which means maybe there's that element of urbanization which you are not measuring, which is now in the rural area because of globalization through internet. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very good questions. So first question is about the definition of corruption. And to be honest, even most scholars do not agree on what the definition is, as always. I mean, that's the reality in social sciences. But urbanization is generally defined as the use of a public office for private gain. So I'm in charge of something for the public good, and I use it for my own private benefit. That's where I talk about corruption. And to your point about really definition differing or depending on the context, I totally agree with you. I remember one day in the seminar I asked a professor, so lobbying basically in the US, to me is more kind of corruption at some point, because you kind of give incentive to someone to take some actions. When it is in the US, it's called lobbying, but if, for instance, in Zimbabwe or Benin, we call corruption. This is problematic. And he says, yes, I know, but that's what it is. So I totally feel that there is a big problem with that. However, the index I'm using is kind of put together by academics, and they need to take into consideration different levels of corruption. So they take street level corruption to like petty corruption. They also take into account, the judge accept bribes to give a false testimony or to give a false outcome. Then you have executive corruption, looking at how officials, executive power is using the power for private gain. So this index kind of encompasses all those, which is very different from existing indexes that look only at maybe private activities, especially like business and how easy is it to conduct business in the country, let's say for instance. Now, talking about your second question, it is true that we have more internet, more cell phones penetrating in those rural areas, and of course, I think it can also be thought of urbanization. But which urbanization is defined as moving from like a more remote place to a place where you have access to more communities, especially in big cities that have more people living in. So it's like living from a small place to a bigger place, usually. But there are sort of technical things involved in, and I can't look that into details, and I think this is a good point. I may actually inquire and see how it really affects that, but my guess is not much, not very much, but yes.
I have serious reservations with the methodology, particularly with the variable corruption index. Although, in principle, we argue that it is done by academics, in reality, who pays the piper plays the tune. We do know that all those are Western academics. And most importantly, much of that information comes from Transparent International, which itself is supported by Western governments and NGOs. Now, to get to the specifics, what is often labeled as corruption by the same institute in Africa is not recorded as corruption in the US. I'll give the example of Nigeria and Dick Cheney. We do know that Dick Cheney, in the last days of the Bush administration, was involved in a lot of shady deals in Nigeria. The Nigerians who were involved, who received the money, were labeled as corrupt. Dick Cheney wasn't. So how do you consider that? Where two people transacting and one is considered corrupt because they've received. The other one is considered a smart businessman because they've given. So that, to me, is questionable because we are using a biased measure. The second thing is, I will consider the quantum of the amount involved or the prevalence. If you go to my country, I can bribe my chief with 2 liters of traditional brew and get 1,000 hectares piece of land. But if I go to the urban areas, to get the same kind of treatment, I probably need to release $1 million. So it can distort perceptions where you think, oh, people in the villages are not that corrupt. Is it because it was 2 liters of beer and in the urban areas it was $1 million and we both achieved the same aim, which was 1,000 hectares of land?
Yeah, I mean, that's what interesting, and I have ongoing projects looking at that because I think this is more like a micro level consideration. So your first observation is there really a difference between giving and receiving? And I have a study conducted in Senegal, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire that shows that there is no significant difference between whether someone gives or receives, and also even considering whether if they use this corrupt gain in service of the community or for themselves. Those are other results that I may present in another study, but for here, we know that of all the indices we have, the dividend index is the most viable. So basically, but they're not even based index on Transparency International. Because Transparency International is so criticized for the bias involved in the reporting of estimations. So this is really much independent. And they have this what we call intercoder reliability, trying to see different people, and they usually use local people to code those indices. So I know those are, I think we can spend hours discussing, but I think the most important here is what is the general take we have on that.
Thank you very much. Sorry, unfortunately we are out of time, and we would like to thank the presenters. I invite Jennifer to